Welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology, doing a follow-up stream to what we discussed earlier with the new dubias that were released by 5 cardinals. And also I addressed the response that the Vatican offered initially in Spanish, but then also a translated version. I went over that, I reviewed it, and if you haven't seen that stream, go ahead and watch it. I put it in the show notes. It was done earlier this morning. You need to see that as context for today's stream, or tonight's stream, I should say. But as a follow-up to that stream, I wanted to go over a couple points that I've noticed in the media. Number one, and let me just once again just kind of briefly recap what we've seen to situate what I'm about to show you. Early in July, 5 cardinals privately reached out to Pope Francis and asked him some questions in the form of a dubia. Dubia is just a Latin term to this formal process of asking for questions, usually theological questions, and they're asking for clarification. Pope Francis responded literally the next day to these 5 cardinals, including Cardinal Burke, responded to them the next day. And he responded to them privately because they submitted it to him privately. Now, they did not like the response that he gave them, so they submitted another dubia, that is another set of questions, August 21st. And they wanted simply a yes or no answer this time. Don't give us these long, expanded, nuanced answers. Just give us yes or no, which was unfair to Pope Francis because they are not yes or no questions. But they insisted, and so far, to our knowledge, have not received a response to that second dubia. However, it seems that the new Cardinal Fernandez, who was aware of the response that Pope Francis gave and had suspected that the cardinals would release the 2 dubia, had initially asked Pope Francis in September, the 25th of September, asked Pope Francis if he could publicly post his response and some comments that Pope Francis made in response to these cardinals. The Pope approved. And Cardinal Fernandez, it would seem, took a step back and waited to see what the cardinals would do. And sure enough, 2 days before the synod begins October 4th, 2 days, which is today, October 2nd, the cardinals released their 2 lists of dubia, their questions. But they initially did not release Pope Francis's response, even though in the second list of questions, they're critiquing his response and even giving a few snippets of what Pope Francis said. But they said they would not release what the Pope said because it was written to them privately, even though they were perfectly comfortable with releasing what they privately wrote to the Pope and what they're critiquing about the Pope. But they did not give us a complete picture. And so the response they gave didn't add up because it was inconsistent with their own behavior. It seems that Cardinal Fernandez anticipated they would do this because he was ready. As soon as the cardinals today posted their dubia and only their side of the story and a very distorted side of what Pope Francis said, as I demonstrated earlier today, the Vatican immediately released what Pope Francis said. It's as if they were waiting for the cardinals to pull this stunt, immediately posted the response so that we got the full context. And when we actually compared what the cardinals said Pope Francis said, and then compared it to what Pope Francis actually said, we saw that, wow, we got a really distorted perspective. And if they had left us in the dark, which they had every intention of doing according to the cardinals themselves, if they had left us in the dark and we did not get the response from the Vatican, we would have been very, very misled, as I demonstrated earlier. Fortunately, the Vatican was anticipating this and was ready for it and responded. I don't know if the cardinals anticipated them doing that literally 2 days before the synod, I don't know if they knew that the Vatican would be ready this close to the Synod with everything busy going on. Maybe they thought they wouldn't be ready, but no, Vatican was ready. And they put things in context. Unfortunately, you know how things go. People often don't see the full picture, and they often don't listen to the other side of the story. So even though we've been given the full picture and the other side of the story, many people are not aware of that. And as you can imagine, chaos has erupted. And people are now saying, Pope Francis says this. He's now approving of same-sex unions and this and that. And there's all kinds of headlines that are absolutely false. When you compare them with what Pope Francis actually said, they are false statements. So this is very troubling. The controversy that has erupted seems very questionable. It's very shady in the way that this thing was done. Fortunately, the Vatican has given us the other side of the story, but as you can imagine, people aren't listening to the other side of the story, and they're rushing to not only social media, but news outlets and reporting fake news, as I will demonstrate here in a moment. Before I do that, though, now having set the stage, I want to show you something that Fernandez said earlier today. Again, this is Cardinal Fernandez, again, who seemed to have anticipated that the Cardinals would do this. So he was ready to come out with Pope Francis's response. And now he is ready to also address the behavior of the way the Cardinals have conducted themselves in this process. So, I mean, he is all over things. He is right there, ready to critique and respond, which I appreciate because, unfortunately, this pontificate has not been very good at this up until now. Up until Fernandez, over the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, the Pope has taken a policy of generally not responding to his critics. In some cases, that's wise. In other cases, that is not wise. In some cases, you need to respond. And to not respond makes things even worse. And so that policy has been a disaster, in my opinion. Whether it was intended to be or not, I don't think it was, but it has practically been a disaster. However, it seems that the tide is shifting under Fernandez, because Fernandez has been responding to a lot of criticisms and has been coming out guns blazing, especially against radical traditionalists who are distorting some things that he and Pope Francis have said. So he's coming out guns blazing. And here he comments on the behavior of the Cardinals. Because, mind you, the Cardinals were not initially going to tell us what Pope Francis said in response to them, even though they were giving us snippets of it, very distorted snippets. And even though they were telling us what they're saying in response to it, they wouldn't tell us what Pope Francis was saying in response. They were going to leave us in the dark, according to the Cardinals themselves in an interview with CNA, as I demonstrated earlier today. They were going to leave us in the dark. The Vatican came out, gave us the full picture. But before the Cardinals did that, before, rather, I should say, the Cardinals then reposted Pope Francis's response, because after the Vatican came out and gave us the full picture, only then the Cardinals then started to post Pope Francis's response. They had initially told us earlier in the day they weren't going to. But when the Vatican came out and posted it, all of a sudden, then it appears on Cardinal Burke's website. As I demonstrated, it wasn't there earlier, but then all of a sudden it finds itself on there. So now they're willing to tell us what the Pope said, only after the Vatican came out and gave us the full picture. Well, Fernandez calls them out for that behavior. And before they came out and then posted what Pope Francis said, in this kind of interim period, before they did that, Fernandez calls them out. And here's what he says. Let me share my screen. I love this. I really appreciate it. I've actually criticized some things about Fernandez, but at the very least, I really appreciate how direct and straightforward this guy is. This is a breath of fresh air. He says, quote, "The Pope has already responded to the dubia of these cardinals. Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, underlines to ABC, this is a translation, they have not published the Holy Father's response, because again, at the time they had not. Only now, after the Vatican published the response, are they now republishing the response, or only now are they making reference to it. Initially, they told us they weren't going to. So in this interim period, he calls them out and says, they have not published the Holy Father's response, which despite his many occupations, took the trouble to respond to them. Instead of publishing those answers, they now make public new questions. That is a second dubia, as if the Pope were his slave for errands. In other words, as if the Pope has the time to sit here in response to every little follow-up objection that they have. Because in reality, the questions that they asked have already been answered by Pope Francis. So it seems very odd for them to even ask the questions. What they should have done, as I've noted before, is restored confidence in the faithful and said, hey, Pope Francis has already addressed these things. And here's what Pope Francis says. And we should follow Pope Francis. Here's what he said. Instead of restoring confidence in the faithful with a Pope, confidence in the Pope among the faithful, instead of building that up, because so many people don't have confidence right now in the magisterium. Instead of doing that, they put into question what Pope Francis actually believes by asking him more questions, as if maybe he doesn't really believe these things when he's already answered them. And so Fernandez calls them out for this and says, look, this is absurd. And he says, you know, as if the Pope is going to sit here and respond to every follow-up question that they have as well, when in reality, the whole thing has already been responded to. So it seems problematic. And I appreciate that Fernandez called that out. Now, let's look at some fake news. Look how this is now being presented. Let's see the collateral damage of what has happened since the Cardinals chose to take this route. Here's the collateral damage. This is from Catholic Herald. So you would think you would get a Catholic article, right? Not so fast. Just because it has Catholic in it doesn't always mean you're going to get a Catholic take. Here's the headline for you. Pope responds to Cardinals' dubia, says yes to blessing some same-sex unions, no on women priests. Now, in reality, I went through what Pope Francis said in the first video. He did not say, quote, yes, end quote, to blessing some same-sex unions. This is absolutely a lie. This is bearing false witness. And it's incredible to see that on a quote-unquote Catholic website. I would have thought that I would have found this on some kind of anti-Catholic Protestant website, but no. Catholic Herald, bearing false witness to what Pope Francis actually said. Well, it's not just them. Look at this one. Now from NCR. Pope signals openness to blessing for gay couples. Study of women's ordination. Did he really signal openness to blessing for gay couples? I read that actually quite differently. Interesting the way that they read this. Here's another one for you. America, the Jesuit Review. Oh, now you know they're capitalizing on this. Pope Francis expresses openness to same-sex blessings in response to cardinal critics. Except, yeah, no, I didn't read him that way. And let me give you another one here. Look at this one. Edward Pinton. Pope Francis appears to open the door to same-sex blessings in his response to Dubium number 2. Really? Saying that priests may use their discretion in giving such blessings, so long as they don't imply a same-sex union is equivalent to a heterosexual marriage. I actually read it a little differently than that. Okay. So they're all coming out to one degree or another saying Pope Francis has given a green light to same-sex unions or same-sex blessings to one degree or another. They're all coming out and saying that. And so now my question is going to be, so given that this is the collateral damage that we've seen from literally not even a full day yet, my question to the Cardinals would be, are the Cardinals going to come out and say, hey, no, that's actually not fully representing what Pope Francis wrote to us, and what you need to do is just hold off in making such sweeping conclusions? Are they going to come out and defend Pope Francis and say, yeah, I think you might be stretching this a little bit, I think you might be distorting it? Or are they going to allow the chaos to just take place and continue and occur for, I don't know, days, weeks, months, years? I'd love to know. Do they agree with this take? Do they believe that Pope Francis said yes to blessing same-sex unions and that he's open to it? Is that their take? Will they come out and say that? I actually have some dubia for the Cardinals. I'm going to read you my dubia for the Cardinals, all of the Cardinals, and then specifically some dubia for Cardinal Burke. Since we're in dubia mode, I have some dubia for them, and I would really appreciate, in the spirit of synodality, that they would accompany me and journey with me and answer some of my questions, because I have some sincere questions here. So I ask the following dubia to all 5 Cardinals who recently wrote their 2 dubia to Pope Francis. I ask them the following: do you submit with religious submission of intellect and will to the magisterial teachings of this pontificate? It's a very simple question, right? You should be able to give a yes or no to that. They're very fond of yes and no. Okay. You should be able to give a yes or no to that. If not, which teachings do you reject and why? And will you state that for the record? If so, if you do accept it, so if yes, will you publicly please state that for the record so all the faithful will know that you accept all the magisterial teachings of this pontificate? So if not, which ones do you reject? Please state that so all of the faithful can know what you do not assent to. And if the answer is yes, please state that so all the faithful know that you accept all the magisterial teachings of this pontificate. And people who are going to, unfortunately, use the Cardinals to promote dissent will no longer be able to do that, because the Cardinals would then be saying, we accept everything that the current pontificate teaches in its magisterium. I think that's a fair question. Number 2, will you publicly call the faithful to adhere with religious submission of intellect and will to the magisterial teachings of this pontificate? So will you ask the faithful to do so? They wrote this, or these dubia, for the sake of the faithful, or at least they published them for the faithful. Okay. Will you now encourage the faithful to adhere with religious submission of intellect and will to the magisterium of the current pontificate? Or will you not? And if not, why not? Number 3, will you publicly correct those who are saying Pope Francis has given the green light to same-sex unions? If not, is that because you believe that he has given the green light to them? If so, then please publicly correct them. Number 4, did you publish your dubia 2 days before the synod in order to undermine the synodal process? I think that is a legitimate question. We would like to know what were your intentions. I would like to know. I imagine plenty of other people would like to know as well. Did you publish your dubia 2 days before the synod in order to undermine the synodal process? If not, then what was the purpose? And if so, will you please state that for everyone so that they can be very clear that that was the intention? Only you can tell us what your intentions were. So will you please tell us your intentions here? Number 5, do you agree that you initially offered an incomplete presentation of what Pope Francis said in your reply to your July dubia, and this incomplete presentation gave the faithful a distorted understanding of what Pope Francis actually said? Do you agree that's accurate? If so, will you please publicly state that for everyone so that they can be aware? And if not, if you don't believe that you offered a distorted presentation of what Pope Francis said, if not, how do you account for the discrepancies between what you initially presented and what we actually discovered Pope Francis said whenever the Vatican revealed what Pope Francis said? How do you account for those apparent discrepancies? I would love some clarification on that. Number 6, will you also clarify if your distortion of what Pope Francis said was intentional? And if you don't believe it was in a distortion, again, see question number 5, part B. So will you also clarify if your distortion of what Pope Francis said was intentional? Because again, only you know the intentions of your hearts. If so, will you please state that for everyone to know? And if not, will you please publicly apologize for unintentionally misleading the faithful? Because I think we're seeing now the faithful are being misled whenever we read headlines like this. So if this was not your intention, I accept that it's unintentional, but will you apologize for unintentionally misleading the faithful in the way that this was conducted? And if not, why not? And now I have some additional dubia specifically for Cardinal Burke. Number 1, Cardinal Burke, will you formally renounce ties to Father James Altman, who has repeatedly referenced you in support of his videos promoting sedevacantism and the death of Pope Francis? After all, you're the one who admitted him into seminary, and he is constantly promoting you in his videos, promoting sedevacantism and calling for the death of Pope Francis. Will you publicly renounce any ties to him and condemn that behavior? If not, why not? And if so, will you please state that publicly so that everyone can be aware that you do not condone Father James Martin and what he is doing? And then number 2, specifically for Cardinal Burke, do you still maintain that Amoris Laetitia is not a magisterial document? If so, upon what basis do you make such a claim? And if not, will you please publicly state that for the record so that people can be aware that you've changed your position? I would really like to know that. Speaking of that, I think it's certainly required for you to do that at this point, especially because a new dubia was submitted and answered. Yes, a different cardinal, the same day that all of this took place, which was, well, some of this took place on September 25th. Same day, Pope Francis answered another dubia. And you know what he answered it about? Amoris Laetitia. Yep. When was that news released? This morning. It was overshadowed because all of the focus right now is on these other dubia that Cardinal Burke and others, these 5 cardinals, presented and that the Pope answered. But there was actually another one by Cardinal Duca where he asks explicitly multiple questions about Amoris Laetitia. And I'm going to go over that tomorrow because Pope Francis responded to that the same day that he gave Fernandez approval to publish his July response. And guess what? What I've been saying about Amoris Laetitia, I'm vindicated. And so when I read that, I thought, wow, this is interesting. This is exactly what I was saying. If you have not seen what I've said about Amoris Laetitia, go and watch it now. I put a link to it in the show notes. It's called The Truth About Amoris Laetitia. Tomorrow at 12 p.m. Central, I will do a review of the dubia that was asked about Amoris Laetitia, this new dubia. I will read it to you, and I will read the response in an English translation. And I will show you how what I've been saying about Amoris Laetitia has been vindicated. And not only that, but all of the dissenters, really on both sides, the radical left and radical right, were wrong. And I would like to know, are they going to come out and apologize now that they've received a Dubia response? And that's demonstrated. Will they come out and apologize and retract their numerous slanders against Pope Francis and his pontificate? Or will they continue to perpetuate the lie? I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I will go over that tomorrow, 12 p.m. Central, a new Dubia, a third Dubia, not related to these two Dubia that we've just seen, the July and August Dubia of the 5 Cardinals, a separate one. However, all released simultaneously, but being overshadowed because we're focusing on this other one. And we're also focused on the synod, on synodality and stuff like that. But it is important. So stay tuned for that. I'll create a link for it in just a little bit. Y'all certainly look for it tomorrow, 12 p.m. Central, tomorrow, October 3rd. Okay, thank y'all so much for watching. Hit that like button and the subscribe button. If you found this video helpful, let me know. Put that in the comment section. If you don't agree with me, that's fine. Let me know why. If you think that I'm uncharitable and you think that I'm mean and you think that I'm wrong, hey, that's fine too. Put that in the comment section. I'd love to hear your feedback. If you agree with my questions or my take, I'd love to hear from you too. Put that in the comment section. And again, hit that subscribe button if you believe in this channel and you think more people need to hear this. Hit that subscribe button, because the more you do that, the more you'll help the algorithm reach new people. And so you'll help me reach a new audience by doing that. So by liking, subscribing, and commenting, that helps me reach new people. Also, if you want to support me, patreon.com/reason and theology is a great place to do it. Or I have a link to a GoFundMe and a PayPal. They're in the show notes if you would rather use those platforms. So certainly consider supporting me if you believe in what I'm doing, you think I'm doing good work, and you want more people to see it, and you want me to continue to do it because this is how I provide for my family. Hey, consider supporting me financially. I would greatly appreciate it. And at the very least, if you can't do that, please pray for me and what I'm doing here. All right, that's going to do it. We'll see y'all later. God bless. If you're looking to buy or sell a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, you're going to want to call Real Estate for Life, and they're going to connect you with a Catholic agent. Now, that agent will donate a portion of their commission upon sale, and Real Estate for Life will donate 75% of that gift to a pro-life organization at no cost to you. Call Real Estate for Life at 1-877-LIFE-US1 or text them 248-431-1440. If you care about the pro-life cause, call them now. Are you confused about how Catholic teaching authority works? With encyclicals, papal bulls, councils, and many other things, it's easy to get confused on what is authoritative and what is not. Fortunately, at MaximusInstitute.com, I have prepared a course explaining the Magisterium from A to Z. Visit the website and check out the course Understanding the Magisterium for more information.